I didn't think Wolfenstein Youngblood was that bad. In fact, aside from technical issues on launch day, I actually found myself engaged in its opening hours, despite the many outcries online. Channel regulars may already know my advocacy of the middle market, that large publishers should invest more in lower budgeted titles to iterate and innovate their designs, not only because many of this generation's biggest games stem directly from it, but many of the franchises that put companies like Bethesda, Rockstar, and EA on the map were middle market too. And initially, Youngblood seemed to realize that vision. Its gorgeous aesthetics from New Colossus were repurposed into radically more open-ended level design that was a far cry from the claustrophobic yet confusing corridors of its predecessor. Combined with an emphasis on Wolfenstein's satisfying bloodbaths rather than cutscenes, and for 2 hours, Youngblood was to New Colossus what Old Blood was to New Order, repurposing an acclaimed title into a faster, tighter experience, one that used its lower budget to grant players more agency and its brevity to enhance each encounter. But little did I know, Youngblood was intended as the longest Wolfenstein by far, and that's when a potential dream became real horror. Levels lost their flexible charm during the 30th tour. Encounters were being skipped to grind missions for XP locks. Boss fights were mixed up due to their identical behavior and appearance. The 4th hour was a bore, 6th was a chore, and the 8th was a snore. As the credits finally rolled, I felt ready to see them 4 hours earlier, when the game's concoction of enemies, levels, weapons, items, and loot ran their course. New Order's Expand alone left me satisfied, yet thirsting for more Nazi blood, whereas 2019's spin-off made me want to vomit it all out. And we've been here before. Dragging games to their credits like a parent hauling their screeching child isn't new. I criticize Prey for exactly that. Thousands more laid this into Alien Isolation, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey produced many headlines. In the case of Wolfenstein Youngblood, the core isn't without merit. Level design was rightfully praised by many critics. Its Uzi might just be my favorite ever to feature in an FPS, and co-op in Wolfenstein is a gripping novelty, as the gameplay isn't traditional cover shooting, but altering between cautious and callous playstyles. Trouble is, that core is relied upon more than ever. In previous games, each level featured a new combat environment, set of encounters, and story progression at the minimum, with more elaborate stages featuring unique vehicles and/or set pieces. Youngblood doesn't have these things each stage, not even most of them. The majority of time is devoted to side missions for NPCs back at base, which all take place in the game's rendition of occupied Paris. So Machine and Arcane attempted to fill that gap by expanding Wolfenstein's core gameplay with XP locks, character builds, and a level structure that let you approach encounters from almost any angle. The intention behind these mechanics are swell, but the 9 weapon parts, for instance, sadly lack the depth to make Wolfenstein's gunplay endure a full campaign that otherwise lacks much of what elevated prior titles. Neither do character abilities, nor the level design. My rifle dealt with every encounter, our character builds felt identical, and every battle was repetitive due to repeating spawn locations. The worst thing you can do with gameplay is make the player tired of it. It's a shame modding isn't a possibility with Machine's Wolfensteins, because I believe a solid 4 to 6 hour Old Bloodish campaign does exist in this 8 to 12 hour sandbox game. An experience that'd leave you wanting more rather than being grateful for its conclusion. And that's what I believe games should do, leave you wanting more. Yet with today's emphasis on drip-fed rewards, frequent updates, and payments, more than ever companies are attempting to hold one's attention to one game and only that game. And not for no reason. When an entity is pouring potentially billions of dollars into their experiences, people better be engaging with them, and not merely for the weekend. Time spent on their products is time taken away from a competitor, and the more time invested on part of players, the more likely they are to justify said investment. And I've had my share of games that have seen hundreds or thousands of hours played. An endless experience isn't inherently wasteful. There's more than enough fan bases to prove there's real value in games which continue to engage the people who love it years after its debut, which itself generates enough curious newcomers to make up for those who've inevitably had their fill. But your World of Warcrafts, Counter-Strikes, and iRacings, their success is not only a rarity, but they're just one type of experience that games can offer, one that had it been all games focus on for the last 20 years would prevent the making of many, many classics. These controlled and contained experiences make themselves more exciting, unique, and memorable by constructing a journey for the player that makes the most of every pixel rendered, not squeezing blood from the stone. Portal's impact was so immeasurable, in part because it was just 2 hours most had never experienced before, and legions of fans couldn't immediately satisfy that craving somewhere else. There's legions of co-op shooters available, and ones with more replayability, content, and focused gameplay than Youngblood. Meanwhile, co-op campaigns in the vein of traditional Wolfenstein is a rarity. An opportunity to rekindle the nostalgia of Doom XBLA, Perfect Dark, or Timesplitters. Something that leave you wanting more and has the unlocks, rewards, and variables for those that really do. It doesn't even need that to remain memorable though. Titanfall 2's campaign is remembered by many as one of the best this generation, and is often attributed to its all-killer, no-filler pacing. Being 4 hours isn't a negative. Making 4 hours that are memorable is a greater accomplishment than providing average white noise for twice that. And the more unique these quality hours are, the longer it sticks. Which also means the benefit of not overindulging your players isn't merely good gameplay, but good business. When a game sells, companies often jump on the name like it's a squirming chicken, cutting and cooking its pieces until only feathers remain on the floor. But it's also profitable to instead rest it. Starve audiences, leave them with those memories before revealing the next incarnation, where that hunger becomes part of the marketing itself. Sometimes people yearn for something so much, one teaser's enough to set the internet alight. Grand Theft Auto is a cultural touchstone, not in spite of gaps in mainline entries nearing that of console generations. That gap is part of its appeal. During the peak of their annualized releases, Assassin's Creed, Need for Speed, and Call of Duty carried all the significance of a new Doritos flavor, while GTA's limited launches make every successive entry an event. It's not just another new video game, it's the new Grand Theft Auto. The latest in a series that continuously influences the entire industry, and I don't doubt this franchise wouldn't hold nearly as much weight to people had it taken note from Ubisoft and Activision. I'm coming at this subject from the angle of someone who consumes games primarily, but is really just a media soak. I consider myself to be as much, if not more, of a YouTube viewer than a creator, and as a viewer, I value the eagerness attached to my favorite channels. I don't want Nakey Jakey to upload every day or Bunny Hop to quintuple his duration. Not only is there a curiosity and anticipation to whatever they make, it gives me time to fully appreciate what they've made, listening to every word, for they won't be saying tons more in the immediate future. I come from waiting years and years for a favorite artist's EP, a new comic volume, or director's latest picture. And should that wait be met with disappointment, there's no shortage of content to occupy its place. The latest Grid by Codemasters was a massive blow, but other races are still being produced and the genre's best still exist. The lack of Max Payne-style shooters is depressing, but there's so many other genres seeing a renaissance that time spent with them instead. My collection of games has grown so vast, the prospect of consuming all the best content this medium has to offer before I die is becoming more unlikely, furthering my preference for memorable, new experiences rather than attempting lifestyles. Though to counter myself, many don't have that luxury. Often the handful of titles bought each year are the only ones someone can afford, and you'd rather have titles that last than disappoint or finish not long after starting. But these days, if you're wanting titles that'll last hundreds or thousands of hours, you don't need to pay full price for them. Many don't have an entrance fee at all. The frequency of sales allows even just $20 to go towards multiple quality titles, and we're entering the age of Game Passes, which, while a complicated subject, have already suggested its subscribers are broadening their horizons. And it's much easier to do that when not every experience is trying to hook you regardless of the depth behind its mechanics. Ideally, games would only conclude exactly when we're satisfied, but developers can only make estimates. Doom 2016 is a game I played well beyond its 12-hour campaign, revisiting and discussing it so much I'm going to ban the game from future videos until Eternal comes out. But for as much as I feel I could engage in its combat forever, many felt it was too repetitive, and often cite Titanfall 2's campaign as superior in this regard, which I can't dispute, especially as the variety is what I too love about that game. And as weird as it sounds, I like that I miss it. Apex Legends was one of last year's biggest surprises, and was a game I too consumed for dozens of hours amongst various friend groups. I admire Respawn's efforts, and I'm glad it's a game that continues to be enjoyed by thousands of people. Though I don't feel much need to revisit it, aside from curiosity of new content. Its peaks have already been reached for me, and by contrast, I prefer the feeling of Titanfall 2's campaign. I prefer wanting to revisit that world, fondly remembering its atmosphere, set pieces, and characters. I prefer revisiting levels with enjoyment that's immediate and nostalgic. I prefer completing something rather than being told to log in again and again until the servers close. And I especially prefer holding that emotion for many more games, having it be constantly filled with new experiences concluding in that desire, rather than each expecting to hold all attention over everything else. Pagani or Lamborghini? Lamborghini. How many Paganis do you have in your Pagani account? I combined it with my Lamborghini account, hence Lamborghini. Why is beauty associated with morality? Because low morality isn't uplifting, unless you're Satan, or the boss from Saints Row. Where's the 40K video? I hear there are people begging for it, and those people can already watch Mandalore. Do you think the nuances of war can ever be portrayed correctly in a video game? Or do you think the portrayal in this media will never be able to fully depict the horrors of war? I remember Bunny Hop describing how his time with Arma 2, the military simulator, ironically became the most anti-war game he's ever played, not because of its content, but because of how he interpreted it. I think Danny O'Dwyer was on the money when saying, games are only apathetic to the realities of war because for the most part, so are we. How much would it take for you to shill Raid Shadow Legends? To let me trash their story mode while paying me?